I always pack a lunch before a hit. I suppose you could call it a tradition. Kind of like leaving carrots and milk out on Christmas Eve. You don't quite know why you do it, but you know that if you don't follow the process, it's going to fuck everything up. Somehow it won't be the same. It's harder to enjoy the spoils if you don't respect your prep. Ergo, the packed lunch before a hit. But that's not all. This pre-wrapped package of midday sustenance carries some very special significance for me. Let me explain. When I was just a boy, my dad used to cook us this great big meal before he went out on a hit. That's probably something I should mention as well. The old man was a hitman too. That's very strange. You don't often see sons following in their dad's footsteps in this line of business. It's far too messy, there's too many loose ends. You remember Jean Reno in The Professional? Basically, kids calls a real clusterfuck. Funnily enough though, I didn't even know the old man was a hitman until I'd already become one. And of course he was dead by then. Fell through the rotten floorboards on the top floor of an abandoned warehouse and landed in the basement. On some bullets. Accidents happen, I suppose. Anyway, I digress. We were all sitting around the kitchen table. Dad would cook us this great big meal, a roast or a stew or something Mum had left in the freezer. And he'd take our hands in his and he'd look at us and he'd say, "God bless us, from this supper to our last." And that's all he'd say. He'd eat in silence. He'd leave in silence. And he wouldn't come back until the middle of the night with that weird smell hanging around him and that distant look in his eyes. And well, it wasn't until years later that I realised where he'd been and what he'd been doing. You know, I have heard that if you work with shit, say you service septic tanks or clean out chicken coops for a living, that the olfactory membranes gather up the bacteria from the stuff and lodge it there forever. So you walk around telling and smelling shit until the end of your days. Well, it's exactly the same thing with gunshot residue. I reckon my dad walked around smelling that until the day he died, and I think I will too. I suppose that's one way of saying why I bring a packed lunch to a hit. Everybody deserves a final meal. And you never do know which is going to be your last.